And then you're also going to get into bryophytes, a little bit of bryophytes. So today in class with you, I'm going to keep going with algae, but I need to at least mention one aspect of bryophytes that I want to introduce to you today so that when you go into lab tomorrow, you won't be totally like, what? What is it? Okay. But I think we left off here last time on Monday. So looking at the idea that a lot of people are pointing to the green algae as the immediate ancestors to terrestrial plants, but don't forget there's also debate that it might be, let me go back to that one. It might be phylum. So they put Cara. Cara used to be in the green algae. The green algae phylum is phylum Pterophyta. Now they put it into their own phylum, Pterophyta, and they also say this one could be the immediate ancestor to terrestrial plants. So right now I generally am just like, okay, green algae green algae is typically what I think about until they prove more solid evidence. So, okay. So we've gone through all this. So green algae, they're really excited about green algae for solving some issues and for commercial purposes. They are being looked at very closely for fuel cell technology. I was doing a little bit of research on the use of algae last semester when I taught 30, and there's a lot of exciting research going on and businesses that are popping up with this idea. And some of them are incredibly creative in partnering their algal grow business with like farmers who are growing like corn, and they're putting the business, the actual plant where they work with the algae right next to these farms where they can use the waste energy from the farm to the algal business. So they're really thinking creatively of how to sustainably grow algae. And algae are pretty easy to work with. They're easy to grow into massive amounts of biomass, so you can get a lot of product from them, whatever product you're looking for. And so it could be fuels of different sorts. Chlamydomonas reinhardtii is a big one right now, looking at biodiesel production. And so these things are really becoming a thing. The amount of research in green algae has really exploded in the last few years. And they just had a local green algae summit that unfortunately we didn't find out about until too late, but it was in Madison, Wisconsin, right on the campus there. And so I'll have to keep my eye out for that because I think they're really onto something. I think algae can be a huge way for us to approach some issues that we're facing with feeding so many people. Fuel, instead of using fossil fuels, turning to something like this. So I think there's just so much potential. And so don't forget about algae. If you're looking for jobs, those are going to be showing up. Here's Botrococcus brownii, is another green algae that's been nicely studied and continues to be studied. And the reason they're interested in it is that it can excrete out large hydrocarbon chains, and basically they're looking at it for oil production, and it's pretty good at it. 30% of its dry weight essentially are these long hydrocarbons, which is essentially petroleum. And so they're really starting to look at this. How can we grow this, work with it? So this is what you're looking at. That's the algae right there, and the droplets that it's little droplets that it's secreting out. That's the long hydrocarbon oils that are being. And it's always nice if you can find any organism that can secrete or excrete out the product you're looking for. That's really easy to work with. Sometimes you'll find that when I work with certain bacteria, they don't always excrete what we're looking for, and then you have to break open the cells, and that's a whole nother step that you have to do in the process that can be a little challenging. So it's nice that they just naturally excrete it out. And so they are actually saying that a lot of the scale formations that we're currently tapping into, that actually might have been green algae origins, and that's actually where we're getting it from. And so again, turning our attention to green algae for fuel production is a big one. They're also looking at it for space exploration. So NASA is very interested in this. So there's some funding through that source too, looking at, of course, it's providing oxygen through its photosynthesis, but it can also serve as a source of food. If you just think about the idea, you can't take oxygen tanks with you. Obviously, if you have people that need to survive out somewhere in the absence of oxygen. And so you have to be able to generate it. They're looking at chlorella, green algae, for that purpose. And it is currently, you can buy chlorella supplements and take those. And they're looking at turning it into a food product as well. The reason for that, whether it's supplement or in food form, is it's high in protein, it has a lot of vitamins, it's easy to digest because it's low in cellulose, it's easy to grow, so you can make a lot of it available for sale. And I was just reading a report that it also has high levels of antioxidants, so very healthy. So this idea of food, using green algae or algae in general for food, has gained interest. Craig Venter is one of the scientists who's really pushing for this. He's been going at this for a while. He was involved with the Human Genome Project, the sequencing of the human genome. He owned a private business that went into partnership with governmental labs to sequence the human genome. And so after that was completed, then he turned his attention to the oceans. He wanted to go and look at what's happening in the oceans, primarily for drug discovery. And he started to fall in love with algae and all the potential that algae has. And so he is saying, this is one of the interviews with him, and he's saying, yeah, we can use algae to feed the world and fuel the planet. And so this is, again, there's money behind this. He's a very wealthy scientist. He's pushing a lot of his own businesses toward this idea. And so it's being in the business world, looking at algal use. So this is just showing the idea of what's currently out there in the market. So, and if you want, you could even have your own little algae growing operation right on your kitchen counter if you want. But technically, this spirulina, I just wanted to make note of this. You see a lot of ads about spirulina as an algae. That's how they phrase it. It's not. So just be aware. It's a cyanobacteria, which cyanobacteria, yes, they can do photosynthesis, very similar to how algae do it. So there's that similarity, but it's a bacteria, which is way different cell type. So just be aware of that. But so many resources, I see them say spirulina, algae. It's like, no. But anyways, it's still something that they're looking at here. So this is something that they're beta testing, I guess you would call it. They're trying to raise funds to actually get this into commercial use. Right now, I think it's sitting, if you wanted to buy this in the beta testing format, I think they were charging like $265 right now. So it's a little expensive. But if this actually makes it to market, it will come down in price eventually as other people start picking up on it. So basically, it's a way to grow, in this case, cyanobacteria on the counter with LED lights, and then the idea is add it to smoothies and things like that. It's pretty, in this growing method, it'd be pretty easy to do that. Would you do that? Would you, I mean, if this was like, $20 or, like you could afford it, it's like, oh, that's not a stretch for me to buy that. Would you give it a shot, or would you like, yeah, growing it up, watching it grow? Did you have an opinion? Eat it. Yeah. I think it has potential. I don't know. I mean, I'm not, oh, by the way, it's tomorrow's lab. You'll get to sample some algae. So come a little bit hungry. Yeah. So if it tasted like sushi, I wouldn't do it because I don't care for sushi. But yeah. Yep. 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 You can do it. It's a good source of nutrients. Yeah. I don't think the taste was that great, but well, fry it in garlic and butter, maybe, maybe. But anyways, something to think about down the line there. You'll probably see more of this kind of idea popping up in the normal world. So this is just a flow chart trying to get across the idea that algae are being used for a variety of purposes or plan to be used for a variety of purposes in the commercial world out there. So they're trying to show, they're even saying cycle remediation is basically using algae to clean up toxins. And so they're looking at that idea, especially if you think about aquatic toxins in the water. That's a great idea. And then they're looking at, down here, the red, a lot of the many other options that they're pursuing. Okay, so if you just do some Google searching on this, you'll find some of these algae companies and the research going on. Okay, so green algae, really kind of a superstar right now in the idea of how can we use them to solve some of our problems that we are currently encountering and will encounter in the near future. Okay, other algae though. Let's look at phylum Chromophyta. Chromophyta or Chromophyta. Brown algae belong into this as well as some others. And so they used to be called Phaeophyta. That's why I have that parentheses, but the current name is Chromophyta. So they look, they can have filamentous growth form, and they're usually branched filaments. So they're not so, they look more shrub-like, I guess, the idea. And then kelps, the kelp formation, that kind of body. And they can also be really tiny, where you need a microscope, or macroscopic. The body, we often refer to the body of many of these algae. We'll look at it and say, oh, look at the thallus. But again, you can say body, that's okay. I'm all right with that. Usually pretty straightforward, not super differentiated, not like the kelps. And then um, when they look internally, they can see that some cells in the larger brown algae seem to have tissue that resembles phloem tissue. Do you remember what gets transported through phloem? Sugar. And so they're looking at that pretty carefully, but they haven't, it's not true phloem tissue. It's not like what we see in the vascular plants, but it serves an analogous function, they think. And so that they're investigating that. They have this special pigment called fucoxanthin, and that's what gives them their interesting olive green and golden brown colors. And so that's kind of unique for them. They also have something unique called algin, and it's part of their cell wall, and it's very slimy or mucilaginous. And so they think it helps them, like at low tide, if they're exposed to air for long stretches. The mucilaginous sliminess helps keep them hydrated, and so they won't dry out. It's also the combination of the algin in the cell wall along with the cellulose right there in the cell wall. It makes their body very tough, but allows flexibility in the wave action, especially along the shoreline. And buoyancy. The mucilaginous substances are fairly buoyant. And so that helps too, because that'll keep the body of the algae, up enough for light to penetrate and be able to get access to light. So I think your book has a table still that will show you some applied uses of algin, how we humans have taken advantage of algin. So I make sure that you're looking at the table when you're doing your textbook readings, because I'll be asking about that as well. So algae's very, very interesting. Here's some brown algae floating on the surface of the ocean. And so you can see they're relatively undifferentiated, nothing too fancy. You can see smaller ones if you get the microscope out. You would see, oh, by the way, in lab tomorrow, when you look at some of our prepared slides, they might show you structures like this. And the slide will be labeled. They'll talk about these structures. We're not really zooming into these structures in this class. That's their sexual reproduction, which I told you before is super diverse and rather complicated. So we're looking at more, just looking at the morphology as you look through these slides. And then we don't have any kelp here in the Great Lakes, but make sure that you're thinking about kelps. They're different. You know, these are very differentiated compared to the typical algae. Definitely have these different portions and tissue types that make up the kelp body. Here's some that are tiny, unicellular, just floating around. And here you form the filamentous type. This one is a brown. And so they range in size from, you need a microscope to, you can get into the kelp form depending on the brown algae species. Also in the brown algae are the diatoms. So they used to be in a different category and then they stuffed them in with the chromophyta. So here we have the diatoms are beautiful and actually have a lot of interesting uses that we take advantage of for human purposes. So diatoms, they have silica in their cell wall, and so they can have these very definite shapes, and they don't break down over time. They're actually very interested in using them as source of oil and fats for nutrition. We're starting to look at that. Diesel fuel production, they think. The silica that's found in their cell wall, we tend to use them in, we call it diatomaceous earth. So that's just not really soil. It's a bunch of diatoms that they have collected from the earth, and they've well, you can just go and buy it at a store. You'll see bags of diatomaceous earth in the gardening section, and so we use that a lot in greenhouse. If you have insect pests that are attacking your plants that have a soft body stage, and they are in the soil at some stage with a soft body, you mix in some diatomaceous earth as they crawl through the soil, and essentially cuts them and kills them effectively. So diatomaceous earth, plus it dries them out, it tends to have a drying effect on insects, so they desiccate. That's another mechanism of action. So we take good advantage of diatomaceous earth because it's safe for the human to apply to the plant and soil, and yet it can be effective as a deterrent against insect pests. But you can use it in other ways. They use it as filters, like I think swimming pool filters are often diatomaceous earth is part of the filtration setup. Not that I own a swimming pool, I would know, but toothpaste. Some toothpastes actually use diatomaceous earth to polish. And my understanding that a lot of cities, or I guess it would be Department of Transportation, they use, there's diatomaceous earth mixed into the paint that they paint on roadways. You know, the white lines and the sidelines, so that at night when the headlights are hitting it, it really reflects and you can see it better. I think that's a great idea. And so that's another very nice use of diatomaceous earth. So there's lots of options of using them, and in addition to just how beautiful they are. If you look at them, and you'll look at them tomorrow, we have a little tiny vial of diatomaceous earth. You just going to sprinkle a tiny bit onto the slide with water and look at it, and you'll see these beautiful forms. And lots of people create art out of this. Different, I've seen a lot of artwork that you can hang on your walls with these diatoms arranged in certain formations. So you can see that there's some interesting designs here. Very, very beautiful. And it's just incredible how complex they are. And they don't break down over time. I just went to a seminar. Oh, they were interviewing for a faculty position to teach. We're going to offer some forensic biology courses. And so we need to hire someone that has that expertise. And so one of the candidates on campus, I went to her seminar and she was talking about diatoms. The topic she was covering was, looking at bodies. She was using the example of if somebody has died and is like if it's under nefarious situation, like they think the person was murdered, then and there she's talking about in the water, if you should find a body in the water versus on land, and that diatoms actually can be a really nice way to try to solve the mystery of where did this person really drown if you find diatoms in the lungs, because diatoms can have specific locations that you find them, and so you can actually trace like where was this body initially if it floated downstream, like you can find the original like murder site or dumping site. And so it was kind of interesting to hear diatoms playing a role in helping solve a murder, mystery essentially. So they don't break down, and so it's easy to extract them and look at them, and they stay intact for forever, pretty much. So beautiful designs. This has been colored, so this is some of the artistic things that I saw on the websites where they've arranged them. So these are a bunch of diatoms all arranged into artwork. That's just a single diatom. There's more artwork. So very, very beautiful. So you'll look at some of those tomorrow. I don't have that kind of stuff for you to look at, but you'll see more natural looking diatoms with diatomaceous earth. Here's some diatoms. The gold ones are diatoms, and then the red are red algae. So diatoms can certainly hang out with other algae. They're not just hanging out with other diatoms. And so red algae are the next ones I want to talk to you about. So phylum Rhodophyta or Rhodophyta. So red algae, these again, you can see some that you need a microscope for because they're so small. Some are filamentous. Some look more like a seaweed. And they are very useful for humans in the sense that they are our source of agar and carrageenan. And so you've probably heard, especially of carrageenan in some of our foods, if you've looked on ingredient lists. But agar too, there's certain types of agar that's been prepared a certain way that you can eat. And I see that in different foods. So agar and carrageenan, typically we use those in foods that are thick, like if you needed to thicken up the food, that's a thickening agent, or it also kind of gives a creamy mouthfeel, and so it's useful for that. But for the red algae, they're making it because it's in their cell wall again. Okay, so it's kind of this idea similar to algin, but it's a different chemical. It's definitely a different chemical. But again, it allows for the red algae body to be flexible, move around in the wave action. They think it might help slough off other, especially microbes that might want to grow on the red algae. You can imagine if you are an algae that needs sunlight, you don't want to be covered in a bunch of like bacteria, for example, that would essentially shade you from sunlight. And so they think that slipperiness is helping keep their body relatively free so they don't get impeded by they get excess sun. And so that's another idea. And so agar, I use agar all the time. And when I teach, well, let's see, you've already used agar plates, right? When you in lab, when you did your soil sampling, looking for microbes that are hanging out with your plants that you're growing. So that was agar that allowed those plates to solidify into that gel-like formation. So we use that all the time. We don't know how to make agar like synthetically. In order to use agar to make agar plates, we have to get it from red algae that have been harvested and the agar extracted. So agar is actually super expensive. When I go to buy it, that's expensive things that I have on my list of things to buy for research or for classwork. So you'll work with agar plates again next week. I believe we're going to work with E. coli, even though this is a botany class, but we're going to work with E. coli, growing them up on agar, but you're going to test garlic against them to see how they handle garlic. And so we'll look at that, but you need to use agar plates for that. Some of the red algae are very distinctive in that they have cell walls that are composed of calcium carbonate. So this makes them very stiff. You tend to see them on coral reefs. And actually, you would say, oh, that's a coral. And you would be wrong. So they actually call them coralline algae. So but it's super, I'll show you. It's super easy to imagine that it's really a coral and not algae. So lots of diversity, again, to the red algae like we see with all the other groups pretty much. So let's see, I urge you, like anytime, when you're shopping, well, you should be doing this anyways, but looking at the ingredient list, look for these things. Ice cream, toothpaste, even has often has these in there. And I think, I don't know if I remember buying a beer making kit from White's Party Store, and they actually included Chondrus crispus. And they said to add that in because it's a good source of carrageenan. And it was my understanding that they included that because when you have carrageenan kind of mixed in, when you pour the beer into a glass, it creates a nice head foam, and the bubbles stay longer. The bubbles don't just appear. So people apparently like that where the foam stays for a little while. And so if you have a little bit of carrageenan mixed in, it helps that foam head stay on for beer. So I thought that was an interesting use of red algae in this case. So Chondrus crispus is, I don't know if they do that in the regular beer industry, but in the beer kit, that's what they have. Here's some other red algae. They don't always look red. They can look more brownish or yellowish, but, oh, that's not the one I'm looking for. Here's the one I'm looking for. There's the coralline algae. And again, if you saw this attached to a coral reef, it's easy to mistake it as a coral. Here's some lovely feathery type red algae or leaf-like. So we ordered a couple of red algae and live samples of red and brown algae. We don't have those around here, so we had to order them. So we'll look at those. And then we ordered a bunch of green algae that you'll look at as well tomorrow. Okay. Sushi. So I think we're getting sushi. I think Meyer has some decent sushi. I think that's where we're getting it from. And you'll get to try seaweed salad. Has anyone tried seaweed salad? Is it? Yeah. Okay, I'll have to try it. I've heard, I think it might be something either you like it or you don't, kind of but I'll have to try it. I'm really trying to like more algae in my diet, but it's hard. Let's see. The last group I wanted to talk about was phylum Dinophyta, where the dinoflagellates exist. Now these ones are very common in marine systems, but some can be found in freshwater, and they have presence on the coral reef system, so they can hang out symbiotically. They're a weird organism. And again, algae, this whole kingdom algae is just so diverse and so many interesting, wacky organisms. So they're technically the technical term is zooxanthellae is the group name, and so they hang out on coral reef system with these different organisms, and they have these very kind of characteristic structures with usually they have two flagella, one wraps around them in a groove, and then the other one hangs for locomotion. And just very, and so when they move, they have this very beautiful spinning action as they're moving, and they look gorgeous. And so on the left image, you're looking more at a coral reef system where you have here it says millions of zooxanthellae live in the mantles of giant clams. And that's what you're looking at there, some giant clams. So again, they're kind of similar to diatoms in the sense that they're very rigid and but very interesting because they live symbiotically with so many different organisms on the coral reef. So some of you may have heard of this organisms that belong to this phylum in the sense of red tides, the bioluminescence that you can see in the oceans. It's largely due to them. And so here are two pictures. The left one is a red tide image, and then the right one is bioluminescence. Okay, and you can see the person is kayaking in the water with the bioluminescence. So with the red tide, those are definitely, you don't want to swim or kayak in those. Okay, so the red tides have toxins being produced by those dinoflagellates, and it can kill fish and other organisms. It can make you sick, probably could kill you in high enough doses as well. So I'll mention a little bit more about this one, Pfiesteria pisidia, an amazing organism. And then the bioluminescent picture on the right, very, very beautiful, but generally they say you really shouldn't be swimming in it. Again, there is a risk for toxin exposure, and they certainly shouldn't swallow, gulp in the water, and certainly shouldn't eat any of that. So just be careful. Beautiful, but admire from a distance. So that Pfiesteria actually can cause problems. There was a huge case study of it happening a while back down south in inland areas coming, water coming in from the ocean a little bit in. And they actually wrote a whole book about it, describing this case study of what happened because it got sensationalized in the sense that the scientists were trying to show what was going on, but the politicians and the city people in the area didn't want to hear it because it was such a tourist area that closing down the beaches due to this organism they didn't want to do because it could cost millions of dollars of tourism. The scientists who were working with Pfiesteria, they were collecting it and brought it back to lab and they started working with it. One of the scientists started to exhibit symptoms of Alzheimer's disease and kind of like mentally just shifted. I mean, he was a really, useful, smart, engaging scientist. And he shifted from that to someone who could barely function and acted like he had Alzheimer's. It was actually the toxin. He was getting accidentally exposed to it in the lab. And they didn't realize how easy it is to get, cross into the human and cause problems. Luckily, after they figured that out and took him away from the project, he recovered. He came back to his normal faculties, but hugely alarming on what it could do. And so there's actually a book it used to be in the Peter White Public Library. That's the cover of And the Water is Turning Blood. And it's about this whole case study of Pfiesteria. And so it is an amazing organism. It can really sense what's going on around itself and adapt and behave differently in order to get access to food. If it senses living fish moving near it, it will start pumping out toxins to paralyze and kill the fish so it can get access to the cells. And so really really interesting organism, but not one you want to really interact with in any stretch. So again, there was fish washing up that looked like this on the shores. And of course, that's not going to do much for the tourism industry. You have massive fish kills with these open stores. And so obviously they needed to figure out what was going on, the poor fish, as well as just the area there. So anyways, this is an excerpt. You can read that on your own from the book. But really, it was quite an interesting book, an easy read and kind of stunning. So that's a very famous example of the dinoflagellates. Okay, so kingdom algae is pretty diverse, really, really interesting. They think that either the green algae or the Charophyta phylum are the immediate ancestors to terrestrial plants. So that's actually the next topic we're going to get into are the terrestrial plants. So we're shifting into that. In and of itself, I don't think it's toxic, but there could be other organisms coming with it. Does anyone know anything more about that? I just barely paid attention to that. I don't know the details. But in and of itself, I think it's more of unsightly, it's in the way, that type of thing. Unless there's some of the dinoflagellates that might be coming along with it, which I could see that happen. So let me just talk to you very quickly here on a concept that they'll bring up again tomorrow in lab with the bryophytes that you'll be looking at. So now we're shifting from aquatic environment onto land, and we'll stay there for the rest of the class. So here we're thinking about, I mean, it's pretty amazing to think about, okay, green algae in the oceans were probably the ancestor to terrestrial plants. So how in the world did they go from totally aquatic to terrestrial? That is a huge environmental difference. And in order to make that shift, they actually think mycorrhizal fungi were key to this process, which I just love that idea. So there's enough evidence popping up in the fossil records and some of the other studies that they've been doing where they can point to the help of mycorrhizal fungi helping. And actually I'll post a short reading, or no, there's a short video I'll post on this idea where they have found genes in algae that allow them to be partners with mycorrhizal fungi. And so they think that when the transition was happening, they had the genetic capability to form this partnership right away with terrestrial fungi. And I think that's just such a cool idea. Of course, we can't prove it because no one was there to witness it, but they're continuing to study that. So we're thinking about bryophytes. They're the first to evolve, okay, onto land. And so they're very ancient. You're most familiar with mosses. So mosses fit into this category. Phylum bryophyte. Mosses are the top left image, down mosses. Middle image are liverworts, and then the lower image are hornworts. So these are very petite plants. They don't get big. And they have some amazing adaptations to their environment. And so we're going to kind of get wacky in the sense that, we're not going to be talking about xylem and phloem, and they don't even really have true leaves. Okay, so they're very ancient. And so I'll be bringing up some of these characteristics, and you'll learn more about it in lab. But I want to introduce this concept right now before you get it in lab, which is this idea. We call it the alternation generation. Okay, so all plants have this. And they've color-coded the two generations here, where you have a haploid phase, which is the top in yellow, haploid means that you have half the number of chromosomes. Okay, and we denote that by your italicized N, N, or sometimes some people put the number 1 in front of it. So 1N or N means the same thing. When you say that, you're denoting that you're talking about the haploid phase, half the number of chromosomes. The other phase is the diploid phase, which we usually denote as 2N. 2N. So 2N is a full complement of the chromosomes. So most of your body is diploid. All right, humans have diploid bodies. The only haploid cells in our body are the ones that are making sperm and egg. All right. The bryophytes, what we're going to find out is that most of the time the bryophytes live their life in the haploid state. So they're very different from us, right, in that regard. They live most of their life in the haploid state. All right, so we need to think about how do they go back and forth between these two phases. So we talk in the plant world, we talk about the gametophyte phase, that's the haploid phase, and the sporophyte phase being the diploid. Right? So these terms are going to be really important. I need you to learn this alternation of generation starting today. This is going to persist now through the end of the semester. So what are we seeing here? The gametophyte phase. Remember, PHYTE on the end of the word is something plant and plant-like. Gameto is referring to gametes, which are eggs and sperm. So the job of the gametophyte phase is to make gametes. That's their job. And so what we see is that you're going to find eventually sperm and egg being produced. Well, once the sperm and egg fuse, that's fertilization. Once you have that happening, you're back in the diploid state. Okay? We call that fertilized egg now a zygote. And now that zygote has to grow, and just through mitosis, just grow and grow and grow and develop into a sporophyte. And the sporophyte's job is to make spores. Okay, so sporophytes make spores. So they're busy doing that. And before they can say that they have mature spores, those spore cells have to go through meiosis. And once you do that, you go through meiosis, that takes your full 2N complement of chromosomes and puts you back into half the number of chromosomes. So remember from basic biology, meiosis is our way of getting, the sperm and egg. So when you look at a moth, and you will tomorrow, when you look at their body, they're all haploid. It's kind of weird. We're diploid. They're haploid. And then eventually they'll have parts, the sporophyte will show up. And that one will be in a different place. All right, so this idea of shifting from gametophyte to sporophyte, well, we got to go through fertilization to bring a 1N to 2N. You got to get sperm and egg united. Get that. And then if you want to go back into the state, you've got to have the number of chromosomes. Well, that's meiosis. So I really encourage you to draw this over and over as you're studying. This is not going away. You'll see this all the way through now. We're going to talk about all the different groups of plants go through this in their own version.
Do the gametophytes end up growing into like the full size, like moths?
Yeah. Okay. So when you look at a moth, it's really, really cool. When you look at, most of you have seen beautiful mosses out there when you're hiking around. So that's all gametophyte tissue. That's all haploid tissue. Right? And so we're going to learn that when they form the sporophyte, it's attached. Like they'll start to form a sporophyte. You might have seen these things sticking up on the top. That's sporophyte. But it's ephemeral, right? You don't always see them. It only shows up at a certain time of the year. And then they go away. But the gametophyte version of the moth takes a while. So we say that in the phylum Bryophyta, the gametophyte phase dominates, we say, because that's the one that's the longest lived. It persist, if you see them around hiking around. And then every once in a while, it'll start forming sporophytes. And they attach to each other. They're physically attached, and sporophyte depends on the gamete. Okay, so you'll learn about this tomorrow again in lab, and you'll have to look at some wonderful, beautiful bryophytes. Okay, so we'll stop there for today.